Bullies crossed the line. The new girl's hidden strength left them begging for mercy. Morgan Hayes kept her head down as she navigated the crowded hallways of Westridge High School. At 16, she was of average height with a slender build that made her appear smaller than she actually was. Her dark brown hair was usually pulled back in a simple ponytail, and she wore minimal makeup that did little to hide the smattering of freckles across her nose and cheeks. There was nothing particularly remarkable about her appearance. She wasn't stunningly beautiful, but she wasn't unattractive either. She was simply average, which under normal circumstances would have allowed her to blend into the background of high school life. But these weren't normal circumstances. Morgan was the new girl, having moved to town just 3 weeks ago when her mother accepted a job offer that required them to relocate mid-semester. Being the new kid was bad enough, but Morgan's naturally quiet demeanor and tendency to keep to herself made her an easy target in the ruthlessly hierarchical ecosystem of Westridge High. What no one at Westridge knew, what no one could possibly suspect, was that Morgan's unassuming exterior concealed an extraordinary secret. Back in her hometown, Morgan had been training in mixed martial arts since she was 7 years old. What had started as her parents' attempt to help their shy daughter build confidence had evolved into a passion. By 16, she had earned her black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and was a state champion in kickboxing. Her previous coach had even suggested she had potential for Olympic-level competition, but Morgan never talked about her accomplishments. After years of being bullied for her interest in a boys' sport at her previous schools, she had learned to keep this part of her life private. When she'd moved to this new town, she'd made a conscious decision to keep her martial arts background to herself. She just wanted to finish high school without drama, without being labeled as that fighter girl again. Just make it through the day without incident, she told herself as she hurried toward her locker. Just be invisible. Well, if it isn't Miss Nobody. The voice belonged to Trent Dawson, the self-appointed king of Westridge High's social hierarchy. At 17, he was tall and athletic, with the kind of good looks that came from good genes, and enough money for designer clothes and weekly haircuts at the most expensive salon in town. He was flanked, as always, by his 2 loyal followers, Dylan Reed, a hulking linebacker with close-cropped blonde hair and a permanently sneering expression, and Marcus Velez, slightly shorter than the others, but with a meanness in his eyes that made up for his lack of physical intimidation. Morgan kept walking, pretending she hadn't heard. This had been her strategy since day one. Avoid engagement. Don't give them the satisfaction of a reaction. Trent stepped directly into her path, forcing her to stop abruptly or collide with him. "I'm talking to you, new girl," he said, loud enough for everyone in the hallway to hear. Students slowed their pace, some stopping altogether, their expressions a mixture of curiosity and that peculiar detachment that came from knowing they weren't the target. No one stepped in. No one ever did. "Excuse me," Morgan said quietly, trying to step around him. "I need to get to my locker." Dylan moved to block her path. "What's the rush? We just want to be friendly." "You've been here, what? Like a month," Marcus added. "And you still haven't properly introduced yourself." Morgan clutched her textbooks tighter against her chest, using them as a shield. "I'm not looking for trouble. Please let me pass." Trent laughed, the sound echoing off the metal lockers. "Hear that, guys? She's not looking for trouble." He leaned in closer, invading her personal space. "Maybe trouble found you anyway." With a swift movement, he knocked the books out of her hands, sending them scattering across the hallway floor. A few students laughed nervously. Most looked away, suddenly very interested in the contents of their lockers or phones. Morgan crouched down to collect her books, her heart pounding not with fear, but with a familiar rush of adrenaline that she fought to suppress. She could feel the muscle memory in her body responding to the threat, her stance automatically adjusting, her breathing deepening. She knew exactly how easy it would be to sweep Trent's legs out from under him, to put him in a hold that would have him gasping for air in seconds. But she couldn't. She wouldn't. "Don't engage. Don't escalate. It's not worth it." Her father's words echoed in her mind. "Your training isn't for showing off or intimidation. It's for protection. As a last resort." She had promised her parents she wouldn't get into fights at her new school. After the incident at her last school, where she had defended herself against a group of girls who had cornered her in the bathroom, resulting in a suspension despite the clear case of self-defense, her parents had made her swear that she would walk away from confrontations whenever possible. So she gathered her books silently, rose to her feet, and once again attempted to move past the trio. "Oh, look at that," Trent mocked. "She's so well behaved, like a trained puppy." More laughter from the gathering crowd. Morgan kept her face expressionless, as she finally managed to reach her locker. She could hear them behind her, still taunting, but she focused on the combination lock, turning it with practiced precision. 27 to 14. The lock clicked open. She exchanged her morning books for afternoon ones, closed the locker, and turned to find all three boys still watching her, clearly disappointed by her lack of reaction. "This isn't over, new girl," Trent called after her as she walked away. "You can't hide forever." Morgan continued walking, her face betraying nothing of the storm brewing inside her. That first encounter set the pattern for the following weeks. Trent and his friends escalated their harassment gradually. It started with verbal taunts, calling her Mouse because of how quiet she was, making loud comments about her plain clothes and lack of friends, speculating within earshot about why someone like her had to transfer schools mid-year. Probably got kicked out for being too boring, was Trent's favorite theory. The cafeteria became a particular battleground. On her fourth day, Dylan accidentally bumped into her while she was carrying her lunch tray, sending her food flying and leaving her covered in spaghetti sauce. The entire cafeteria had erupted in laughter while she cleaned herself up in silence, her hands trembling with the effort it took not to respond. In gym class, Marcus made sure she was always chosen last for teams, even though she was far from the least athletic person in class. When she did get to play, they worked to isolate her, never passing her the ball in basketball, deliberately targeting her too hard in dodgeball. The teachers noticed some of it, of course, but their interventions were half-hearted at best. Trent's father was on the school board and a major donor to the athletics program. Dylan's mother was the PTA president. The few times a teacher did call them out, the boys would apologize with exaggerated sincerity, only to redouble their efforts. When adult supervision faded, Morgan had hoped that by maintaining her strategy of non-engagement, they would eventually get bored and move on to easier targets. But her very stoicism seemed to inflame them further, turning what might have been a passing interest in tormenting the new girl into a dedicated campaign. By the third week, Morgan had developed a system for minimizing her exposure to them. She mapped out alternate routes between classes, timing her movements to avoid the hallways when she knew they would be there. She started eating lunch in the library or sometimes even in a bathroom stall when the librarian kicked her out for bringing food. She became expert at making herself scarce, at becoming truly invisible, but she couldn't always avoid them completely, and each encounter left her more tense than the last. She found herself constantly bracing for the next incident, her body humming with a vigilance that was exhausting to maintain. At night, she would finally release some of her pent-up energy by practicing her forms in her bedroom, silently moving through the familiar kata, finding a measure of peace in the disciplined movements. The breaking point came exactly 1 month after her arrival at Westridge. Morgan had stayed late after school to get some extra help in chemistry, a subject she was struggling with due to differences between her old school's curriculum and Westridge's. By the time she finished, the hallways were nearly deserted, most students having already gone home or moved to after-school activities. She walked quickly toward her locker, planning to grab her jacket and head out through the side entrance, avoiding the main doors where students tended to congregate. She was so focused on her exit strategy that she didn't notice the footsteps behind her until it was too late. "Well, look who it is," came Trent's voice, echoing slightly in the empty hallway. "Little Mouse all alone." Morgan turned slowly to find all three boys blocking her path to the exit. There was something different about them today, a new level of intensity in their expressions that sent warning signals flaring through her system. "I'm just leaving," she said evenly. "I don't want any trouble." "You keep saying that," Trent replied, taking a step closer, "but I'm starting to think you're just playing hard to get." Marcus snickered. "Yeah, maybe she's secretly into us. All that running away is just to get our attention." Dylan, who had circled around behind her, leaned in uncomfortably close. "Is that it, Mouse? You trying to get us to chase you?" Morgan's heart rate accelerated, but her face remained calm. She assessed the situation with the clarity that came from years of training. 3 opponents, confined space, no witnesses, no teacher in sight. She took a careful step backward, maintaining awareness of Dylan's position behind her. "I'm not playing anything, I just want to go home." "We've been patient with you," Trent said, his tone shifting to something harder, "given you time to figure out how things work around here. But it's been a month, and you still walk around like you're better than everyone else, like you don't even need to acknowledge us." "I don't think I'm better than anyone," Morgan replied, still keeping her voice level despite the adrenaline beginning to course through her veins. "I just want to be left alone." "See, that's the problem." Trent stepped even closer. "Nobody gets to decide that around here except me." In one swift motion, He reached out and grabbed her arm. The touch was like an electric shock, breaking through the careful restraint she had maintained for weeks. Morgan reacted instinctively, twisting her arm to break his grip, a basic self-defense move that required minimal force. Trent's eyes widened in surprise, but his expression quickly hardened into anger. "Oh, so the mouse has claws after all." He nodded to Dylan. "Hold her." Before she could react, Dylan's thick arms wrapped around her from behind, pinning her arms to her sides. Morgan went very still, the position triggering memories of countless training sessions on how to escape from exactly this kind of hold. "Don't do it," she told herself. "Walk away. Find another solution. Let's see if we can get a real reaction out of you for once," Trent said, his face now uncomfortably close to hers. What happened next seemed to unfold in slow motion. Trent nodded to Marcus, who moved to her, sighed with a grin that made her skin crawl. Then, with deliberate intent, he reached out his hand toward her backside. "Let's see how you like this, mouse," Marcus taunted, as his hand moved to slap her rear. Something snapped inside Morgan. A line had been crossed. This wasn't just bullying anymore. This was assault. In the split second before Marcus's hand made contact, Morgan made her decision. With a controlled burst of strength that took Dylan completely by surprise, she dropped her weight and twisted sharply, freeing herself from his grip. Before any of them could react, she executed a perfect sweep kick that sent Marcus crashing to the floor. Trent lunged for her, but she was already moving, years of muscle memory taking over. She sidestepped his charge, using his own momentum against him as she grabbed his arm and flipped him over her shoulder. He landed hard on his back, the impact knocking the wind out of him. Dylan, recovering from his shock, charged at her like a bull. Morgan pivoted at the last second, using a simple redirection technique to send him crashing into the lockers with a thunderous clang that echoed down the hallway. The entire sequence had taken less than 5 seconds. All 3 boys were down, but Morgan knew this wasn't over. She dropped into a fighting stance, her breathing controlled, her mind clear for the first time in weeks. Marcus was the first to regain his feet, his face flushed with rage and humiliation. "You're dead, bitch," he spat, charging at her with his fist raised. Morgan blocked his wild punch with practiced ease, countering with a strike to his solar plexus that left him doubled over and gasping for breath. Trent was up next, circling, her warily now, his earlier confidence replaced by uncertainty. "What the hell, who are you?" "The girl you shouldn't have messed with," Morgan replied, her voice steady. "The girl you definitely shouldn't have tried to touch." He lunged at her again, but his movements were predictable, driven by anger rather than skill. Morgan deflected his attack and responded with a controlled combination, a jab to disorient, followed by a roundhouse kick that connected with his thigh, sending him back to the floor with a cry of pain. Dylan, having recovered from his collision with the lockers, approached more cautiously. He was bigger and stronger than the others, and despite his shock, he wasn't backing down. "You're going to regret this," he threatened. "No," Morgan replied calmly. "You're going to regret thinking you had the right to put your hands on me." He swung at her, a powerful blow that would have done serious damage if it had connected, but Morgan had been sparring with grown men twice his size since she was 12. She ducked under his swing and delivered a precise strike to his kidney, following up with an elbow to his ribs that left him wheezing. The fight, if it could even be called that given how one-sided it was, lasted less than a minute. When it was over, all 3 boys were on the ground, none seriously injured but all thoroughly defeated and humiliated. Morgan stood in the center of the hallway, her breathing controlled, her stance still ready. She looked at each of them in turn. "Listen carefully because I'm only going to say this once," she said, her voice low but clear. "This ends now. You don't speak to me. You don't look at me. You definitely don't touch me ever again. Not me. And not anyone else at this school. Because if I find out you're harassing anyone the way you harassed me, what happened today will seem like a warm-up." The sound of footsteps and voices came from around the corner. Someone was coming, likely drawn by the noise of the fight. Morgan straightened up, adjusting her clothes and pushing her hair back into its ponytail. By the time Mr. Harrison, the vice principal, rounded the corner with the janitor in tow, she looked completely composed, quite a contrast to the 3 boys still struggling to their feet. "What in God's name is going on here?" Mr. Harrison demanded, taking in the scene with wide eyes. Trent, holding his side where a bruise was already forming, pointed at Morgan. "She attacked us! She's crazy!" Mr. Harrison looked skeptical, glancing between the 3 athletic teenage boys and the slender girl standing calmly before them. "Ms. Hayes, would you care to explain?" Morgan met his gaze steadily. "They cornered me as I was leaving. Dylan held me from behind while Marcus tried to inappropriately touch me. I defended myself. The janitor, An older man named Ray, who had always given Morgan a kind nod when they passed in the hallways, spoke up. "I saw the whole thing from down the hall, Mr. Harrison. The boys had her surrounded. They were the aggressors." Mr. Harrison's expression darkened as he looked at the three boys with new understanding. "All of you, my office. Now, Mr. Lee, please call these boys' parents. Ms. Hayes, you come with me too." As they walked toward the administrative offices, Morgan noticed that other students had begun to emerge from classrooms and after-school activities, drawn by the commotion. They stared as the procession passed, whispering to each other. Among them was Eliza Chen, a quiet girl from Morgan's English class who had sometimes smiled at her, but never quite worked up the courage to speak. As their eyes met, Eliza gave her a small approving nod. Word spread through Westridge High like wildfire. By the next morning, everyone had heard some version of what had happened, though the stories varied wildly in their details. In some tellings, Morgan had put all three boys in the hospital. In others, she was a secret agent in training. The truth, that she was simply a skilled martial artist who had defended herself when attacked, was almost disappointing by comparison. The consequences came swiftly. Based on Ray the janitor's eyewitness account and the reluctant confessions extracted from the boys themselves, Trent, Dylan, and Marcus were suspended for 2 weeks, with the threat of expulsion if they engaged in any further harassment. Morgan received no punishment, the administration acknowledging that she had acted in self-defense, though the principal did have a serious conversation with her about reporting threats rather than handling them physically in the future. The day after the incident, as Morgan walked through the hallways, she noticed an immediate change. Students who had previously looked through her now watched her with open curiosity and even a kind of respect. The path before her seemed to clear automatically, people stepping aside to let her pass. In the cafeteria, as she carried her tray toward what had become her usual isolated spot, Eliza Chen suddenly appeared beside her. "You can sit with us if you want," she offered, gesturing toward a table where a couple of other students sat. There was a tentative quality to the invitation, but the smile that accompanied it was genuine. Morgan hesitated only briefly before nodding. "Thanks, I'd like that." As she sat down, Eliza introduced her to the others: Zoe, a theater kid with bright blue hair, and Amir, who ran the school's computer club. They were outsiders in their own ways, having formed a small alliance against the tide of high school conformity. "So," Zoe said, leaning forward eagerly, "is it true you're a ninja or something?" Morgan couldn't help but laugh, the sound surprising her after weeks of tensely controlled silence. "Not a ninja. I've been training in mixed martial arts since I was 7. I compete at the state level." "That's actually way cooler than being a ninja," Amir commented, "because it's real." "Why didn't you say anything before?" Eliza asked. Morgan shrugged, picking at her food. "At my old school, I got labeled as the violent girl when I stood up for myself. I thought maybe if I kept it quiet here, I could just be normal." "Normal is overrated," Zoe declared, her blue hair bobbing as she nodded emphatically. Over the next few days, Morgan found herself cautiously opening up, not just to her new friends but to others as well. She still wasn't loud or outgoing. That wasn't her personality, but she stopped trying to make herself invisible. When people asked about her martial arts training, she answered honestly, and even agreed to show a few basic moves to anyone who was interested. A week after the incident, the PE teacher, Ms. Rodriguez, approached her after class. "Hayes," she said, "I heard about your background. We're starting a self-defense unit next month. Would you be interested in helping me demonstrate some techniques?" Morgan considered it briefly before nodding. "I'd like that." "Good," Ms. Rodriguez replied with an approving nod. "And if you're interested, the community center downtown has a youth martial arts program that could use volunteer assistance on weekends." For the first time since arriving at Westridge, Morgan felt like she might actually find her place here. When Trent, Dylan, and Marcus returned from their suspension, they were subdued. The social hierarchy had shifted in their absence, their untouchable status diminished by both their behavior and their humiliating defeat. While still popular in certain circles, they no longer walked the halls like they owned them. Morgan had been bracing herself for their return, half expecting them to seek revenge despite the warnings. But when they finally crossed paths in the cafeteria, it was Trent who looked away first, his face flushing with the memory of his defeat. Later that same day, as Morgan was leaving chemistry class, she found Marcus waiting for her in the hallway. She immediately went on alert, but he held up his hands in a gesture of peace. "Can I talk to you for a second?" he asked, his voice lacking its usual aggressive edge. Morgan nodded cautiously, making sure to keep enough distance between them that she could react if necessary. "I wanted to he began, then stopped, clearly struggling with what he wanted to say. He took a deep breath and tried again. I was out of line, way out of line. What we did, what I tried to do, it was wrong. I know saying sorry doesn't fix it, but I am. Sorry, I mean. Morgan studied him, surprised by what seemed like genuine regret. Why are you telling me this? Marcus shrugged uncomfortably. My dad, when the school told him what happened, what we tried to do to you, I've never seen him so disappointed. He made me really think about it, about how I'd feel if someone did that to my little sister. He met her eyes for the first time. I'm not asking you to forgive me. I just wanted you to know that I get it now, how messed up it was. After a moment of consideration, Morgan nodded. Thank you for saying that. I appreciate it. She paused, then added, everyone deserves a second chance to do better. Just make sure you take yours. As Marcus walked away, Morgan felt a weight lifting that she hadn't even realized she'd been carrying. The confrontation had changed things, yes, but perhaps in ways that went deeper than just establishing her as someone not to be messed with. Over the following weeks, more changes became apparent. A freshman girl stopped Morgan in the hallway to thank her for standing up to Trent and his friends. They used to target my brother too, she explained, but they've backed off since, Even more surprisingly, other students who had been victims or bystanders began to find their voices. When a senior boy tried to intimidate a sophomore in the lunch line, 2 students immediately stepped in, telling him to back off. The culture of silent acceptance was beginning to crack. 2 months after the incident, Morgan was practicing alone in the gym after school when Trent entered. She tensed automatically, but he stopped at a respectful distance. The janitor said you might be in here, he said by way of explanation. I've been wanting to talk to you. Morgan paused her routine but remained on guard. What about? Trent seemed to be choosing his words carefully. I've been doing community service at the youth center as part of my disciplinary action. There are these kids there, younger kids, who talk about being bullied at their schools. He ran a hand through his hair, clearly uncomfortable. The thing is, listening to them, I started seeing myself in the stories they told about the kids who torment them, the way they described feeling, how scared and angry and helpless. I never thought about it that way before. Morgan said nothing, waiting for him to continue. Anyway, he went on, I'm working with them on confidence-building stuff, but I thought maybe. You obviously know how to defend yourself. Maybe you could show them some basics, just so they feel less vulnerable. The request was so unexpected that Morgan wasn't sure how to respond at first. She studied Trent's face, looking for signs of deception, but all she saw was an awkward sincerity. Why ask me? She finally said, especially after everything that happened. Trent met her gaze directly for the first time. Because you could have really hurt us that day. You had every right to after what we tried to do. But you didn't. You stopped us, taught us a lesson, but you showed restraint. He paused. That's what these kids need to learn. How to protect themselves without becoming bullies themselves. Morgan considered his words, recognizing the truth in them. Her father had taught her the same principle from her earliest days of training. The ultimate goal isn't to defeat an opponent, but to avoid the fight altogether. And if you can't avoid it, your goal is to end it with minimal harm to everyone involved. After a long moment, she nodded. I'll think about it. The following Saturday, Morgan arrived at the youth center, her gym bag over her shoulder. She found Trent already there with a group of about 10 kids, ranging in age from 8 to 13. When he saw her, his face lit up with relief. You came, he said, unable to hide his surprise. I said I would, she replied simply. As she began working with the children, showing them basic stances and simple defensive moves, Morgan felt something shift within herself. She watched their faces transform from uncertainty to concentration, to pride as they mastered each new technique. She recognized in them the same mixture of vulnerability and strength that she carried within herself. One little girl, no more than 9, with glasses too big for her face and a serious expression, stayed after the session to ask Morgan a question. Will this really work if the bullies are a lot bigger than me? Morgan knelt down to meet her at eye level. The techniques help, but the most important thing you're learning is that you have the right to stand up for yourself. That knowledge changes how you carry yourself, how you respond to threats. Sometimes that's enough to make the bullies think twice. The girl considered this with solemn intensity, before nodding. I think I understand. It's like having a superpower, but the power is knowing you're strong inside even if they don't see it yet. That's exactly right, Morgan smiled. And the best part about this superpower is that you've had it all along. We're just helping you discover it. As Morgan walked home that day, she reflected on her journey since arriving at Westridge. She had come trying to hide an essential part of herself, believing that invisibility was her best defense against the pain of not belonging. Instead, she had discovered that true strength came not from concealing who she was, but from embracing it, from standing firmly in her power, even when doing so made her a target. The irony wasn't lost on her that it had taken Trent, Dylan, and Marcus's worst behavior to break through the walls she had built around herself. Their attempt to humiliate and violate her had instead set her free, forcing her to claim her power in a way that transformed not just her own experience at school, but the environment itself. By the time spring arrived, Morgan had established herself as someone who walked her own path. She wasn't popular in the conventional sense. She was still too quiet, too serious for that, but she was respected. She had friends who valued her for exactly who she was. She had found purpose in helping younger kids develop the confidence she had struggled so hard to claim for herself, and she had learned, perhaps most importantly, that hiding your light doesn't actually keep you safe, it just keeps you small. True safety, true strength comes from shining so brightly that those who would try to dim you must either step back or be transformed by your glow. As Morgan entered the school building on a bright May morning, she caught sight of her reflection in the glass doors, standing tall, moving with conscious grace, her eyes clear and direct. She barely recognized the girl who had arrived in January, hunched and hoping not to be noticed. "This is who I've always been," she thought with quiet certainty. "I just needed to be brave enough to let everyone else see it too." She pushed through the doors and stepped into the light, ready to face whatever came next. Not as the mouse, not as the fighter, but simply as Morgan, entirely herself and entirely enough.